Entrepreneurship is a process. Do you have all the tools and methods you need to manage the process successfully? Today we talk to an entrepreneur who has compiled entrepreneurial process management tools and is willing to share.
This is the Economics for Entrepreneurs podcast, a project of the Mises Institute, applying the principles of economics to start, grow, and manage your business. For free tools, resources, key takeaways, and actionable insights from each episode, visit Mises.org/E4EPod. Now, here's Hunter Hastings.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. One of the most helpful insights from Austrian economics is to see the market, and entrepreneurship specifically, as a process. It's a process built on win-win exchanges between sellers and buyers, firms and customers, entrepreneurs with new solutions, and individuals with unmet needs. The concept of process has a lot of implications for us all. There's a beginning, and knowing the right place to start is important. We always urge entrepreneurs to start with the identification of an unmet need that you can meet. But at the same time, it's equally important to identify the strengths and competitive advantages and other attributes and resources you can bring to bear to meet that need. How exactly do these two elements of the process unfold? Austrian economics also highlights for us the role of time in entrepreneurship. The process unfolds before us. A lot of what we're talking about here takes place in the entrepreneurial future. To establish a customer need requires feedback and feedback loops, and the learning entrepreneurs take away from them, and that all takes time. Process always involves some trial and error, the very definition of a feedback loop. And time is required both for the trial to unfold and the error to be revealed, processed, and turned into a new trial. Wouldn't it be great if we could view the process before having to enter into the uncertain future? One way to do this is through the eyes of the entrepreneur. People have been successful in the past. They can look back on the process they followed, distill it, and identify the critical elements of their own success. Business schools try to simulate this experience with their case study method. They describe a historical business unfolding, whether in growth or decline, and attempt to teach students how to interpret that case study and draw conclusions about how to deal with similar circumstances in the future. But that approach is very flawed. Neither the case study author, nor the professor, nor the students were present at the time. They can't reproduce the subjective emotional experiences, the aspects of culture and circumstances that were in place at the time, or the actual real-time trade-off debates that undoubtedly occurred but are no longer visible. An improvement on the case study approach is the actual experience of successful entrepreneurs, captured in their own recollection and reflection, and ordered into a cogent set of principles, tools, and methods. This is especially valuable if the entrepreneur has experienced repeated success in multiple businesses and multiple situations and environments. To be most helpful, of course, the entrepreneur must be pretty unusually good at historical analysis and synthesis. Today, we're talking to just such an entrepreneur. John Chisholm started, grew, managed, and successfully sold several businesses in a number of fields. He has helped and advised numerous entrepreneurs and firms since then to expand his scope of experience. He wrote a book called Unleash Your Inner Company. Use passion and perseverance to build your ideal business. In this book, you'll find an overview of the entrepreneurial process as John has distilled it from his retrospective analysis, and even more importantly, a large number of very, very useful tools for entrepreneurs, some of which we'll discuss today. John, welcome to Economics for Entrepreneurs.
Thanks so much, Hunter. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, you're a very special guest for us, John. You're a repeat entrepreneur. You've repeatedly been successful in starting and growing companies, managing them, and then in a couple of cases, selling them on to larger acquirers who recognized the customer value that you achieved. Now you teach and advise entrepreneurs, which is a very prized activity for us. You wrote a wonderful book called Unleash Your Inner Company, and we'll link to that on the podcast page. But it distills all your advice and experiences for entrepreneurs, and you talk about a 10-step process. And I went through the book, and it's extremely practical. I found myself actually following many of the exercises, which are both steps towards the future and quality checks for what you've already done. So that's what we'll talk about today. One question that arose for me, and you can tell us how the book was developed, but did you actually use those exercises when you were a CEO and managing businesses, or did you develop them afterwards as you were reflecting on your experience?
Well, a good question, Hunter. It's purely a retrospective 10 steps. I tried to look backwards and see what did the different companies I started, sold, and grew have in common, and tried to come up with a series of steps that were specific enough to be useful, but broad enough to cover all the cases, and all based on the real world cases that I'd been through. So no, I didn't have the benefit of the process when I went through, but it is the best reflection I can come up with of the processes I did go through.
Well, good. And so one of the points that comes out of that is the idea of entrepreneurship as a process, in the sense that it's got a start, a beginning, and an end. And I know that you say in the book, even if you write down the process, it's not what you're going to experience, because I think you have a metaphor of stumbling through the jungle and tripping over rocks, and you keep getting up and you keep going through it. So is entrepreneurship a process, John?
I think that's a very good way to think about it. It's a process of continuous discovery. It's a process of continuously refining the fit between a customer need and your advantages. It's not one that you can plan out very far in advance, because it's a dynamic environment in which everything is constantly changing. Customer needs, the competitive environment, your strengths, your resources, all of these things are constantly changing because new customers are always coming into the market, new competitors are coming in, new technologies are being introduced. And so in this very dynamic environment, you're trying to continuously find and monitor the best fit between a customer need and a solution you might offer. It's an iterative process, which means that the only real way to make progress is through trial and error, trying lots of things and exploring the frontier. Many of those will be failures. But as I say in the book, the person who tries lots of things has it all over the person who doesn't try. Do experiments, see if a product satisfies a need, because that person is learning where needs are, or what solutions at various price points will sell. And so as I say in the book, there may well be for each of us an optimal mix of successes and failures. If you've tried a whole bunch of things and they've all succeeded, maybe next time you should stretch a little bit further and be prepared to take more in the way of risks. If you've tried a whole bunch of things and they've failed, maybe next time you should set your sights a little more modestly and plan to apply more in the way of resources to achieve whatever goal or fit that you were trying to achieve.
Yeah, good. That's great advice, John, and thank you for that. we call it dynamic flexibility. I think we don't quite get the words as persuasive as you do, but that's the idea. So let's set out on that journey a little bit, but I want to put our conversation in context, John. You've started high growth tech companies. We want to be ecumenical in our Economics for Entrepreneurs listener group, and we concentrate on what we call the 97%, which is the number of businesses that are classified by the government as small or medium, which I think is based on number of employees. And it's a little bit arrogant on the government's part, but we'll go with that. But they can be high street businesses, they can be small service providers, they can be contractors and plumbers, or they can be 499 employee companies with hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. So I want to make sure that you feel that your process that we're going to talk about applies to all of those kinds of entrepreneurial businesses. Are we right to assume that?
Absolutely. Ecumenical is a good word, Hunter. Some entrepreneurs and authors take the position that there are two fundamental types of entrepreneurship, or they say that entrepreneurship is distinct from starting a small business. I don't find that distinction compelling at all. What the two have in common, whether it's a high-tech or low-tech business, is finding a solution to a customer need and having an advantage for providing that solution relative to others who might try to satisfy that customer need. And yes, some businesses may attract or have the potential to attract venture capital and others don't, but any company will benefit, no matter how small, modest, will benefit from application of new technology or finding ways to make the business as scalable as possible. And so even if you're a plumber or an electrician or a hairdresser, all of these are examples that I use in my book, as well as high-tech examples like internet and mobile app startups and AI startups. Even these sole proprietorships can benefit from the application of new technologies and can potentially give the entrepreneur more options and make them more profitable, and let the entrepreneur create an asset which has more value if they choose to sell it. For example, the electricians and plumbers both need to schedule appointments. Well, there are lots of tools online now to automate and facilitate the customer scheduling process. I could go on and on with examples of that sort. Yes, I don't see a fundamental difference. In fact, if you look at some of the largest brands today in the world, McDonald's, Walmart, Starbucks, these started as sole proprietorships. Starbucks started as a single coffee shop. McDonald's started as a single hamburger store. Walmart started as a single department store. And so those became very scalable, but they evolved to scalable business models over time. So I think that's a very fine way to get your business started. Find a customer need, satisfy it, and then gradually over time figure out how to streamline operations, use different techniques like network effects and automation to increase the scalability of the business. And so again, I don't distinguish between those two types.
We're talking to John Chisholm about his set of tools and techniques for business growth. We've developed a complementary set of tools and techniques for managing the steps in the growth process. We call our bundle of process steps and tools the Austrian Entrepreneur's Journey. It's available as an online course, that comes with a lot of free downloadable tools and process checklists. Check it out at learn.economicsforentrepreneurs.com. That's learn.economicsforentrepreneurs.com. Now back to our conversation with John. Good. That's great. And we're going to get to your growth tools in a second, but I want to start a little bit earlier in the process. We often talk about a self-assessment of the entrepreneur before he or she starts on the journey to orient themselves towards their best route to success. And you have the most complete and comprehensive approach to that I've seen. You give it the acronym STARS, which, as I recall, has an S and a T and two A's and two R's and an S. But tell us about that. That you say that, hey, we sometimes think we have fewer resources than we actually have, and STARS is a tool to give us a comprehensive view. So tell us about the STARS tool.
Well, it is a systematic way to inventory and catalog all of the resources that you bring to bear in starting a company and make it a success. The letters stand, there are 7 letters, stand for your skills, the technologies that you know about, your assets, your achievements, your relationships, your reputation, and your strengths as in inner strengths. And something I recommend really for anyone, whether they plan to start their own business or not, is to either take out a big sheet of paper and put 7 columns on it, or use an Excel spreadsheet and create a spreadsheet with 7 columns. And under each of those words at the top of each column, write down as many resources as you have that you can think of, even if they don't seem particularly relevant to starting a business. Your skills and technologies include those that you've learned both by formal training and because you're passionate about the ideas and you've been, exploring them or delving into them. Your assets may be physical, financial, or knowledge-based. A physical asset might be a computer or a spare bedroom or a garage that you can use to get started in. Financial assets would be funds that you can invest in the business. Knowledge-based assets would be things, for example, knowledge of your hometown. If you know the lay of the land, the key companies, the civic leaders, all of those could be useful and relevant for starting a business there. Your achievements, regardless of what realm they're in, even if, say, they're in the sports realm or something unrelated to business, put them down because they will help build your self-confidence. And often success in one area of life spills over into another area of life. Your relationships are both personal and professional. Your reputation is how other people know you. And your inner strengths are qualities like courage, creativity, compassion, perseverance, passion, and so forth that you've demonstrated. It's a good exercise to do with someone who knows you well because they will see strengths in you that you don't see in yourself.
Yeah.
And we use this chart, the STARS chart, again and again throughout the 10-step process in 4 different ways. 1, to assess the fit between you and each of the unsatisfied customer needs that you've identified. 2, to see where the gaps are, to see what additional resources you need to acquire to do the best job of satisfying that need. 3, to build your self-confidence, because very often there are many more resources on this chart than you realize. And 4, to innovate. Innovation is largely a process of combining things we already know in novel ways. Well, the STARS chart lays out everything you know. The most relevant columns tend to be your skills and technologies. And one of the exercises I provide in the book is to systematically go through the combinations, the pairs of those technologies, and try to think of a customer need that pair might satisfy. You know both of the items in the pair, so you might be uniquely in a position to satisfy the customer need that uses both of them. Many of the combinations won't make sense. For example, let's say your skills are scuba diving and include scuba diving and golf. Well, it's hard to think about how you could combine those. Although playing golf underwater with scuba tanks, maybe has a potential for a new sport. But some of them will be combinations that maybe you hadn't considered and might suggest additional customer needs that you could address.
Yeah. There's a wonderful exercises, John, and I want to pick out a couple of the knowledge resources that you talked about, because I found it a very novel way of talking about them. I said, you've got knowledge of what you can achieve with a given set of resources, but there's also knowledge about what others can achieve with a given set of resources. Can you explain your thinking there?
Yes, and this gets back to what I was talking about earlier. When the more things you try, the better judge it makes you of what you can achieve specifically, and more broadly, what can be achieved in general by people. So if you have tried a whole bunch of things, some of which have succeeded and some of which haven't, and that helps you trace out the boundary between what can be achieved with a given set of resources and what can't be. And that helps you become a better judge of setting goals for your business and for others in your business. But it also makes you a better judge of what others can achieve. So that makes you a better manager, a better investment, and a better investor, and a better mentor to others. So again, the person who tries lots of things, whether they succeed or fail, has it all over the one who doesn't. And so should you put failures on your stars chart? I would say yes, if you learned from that experience.
Yeah. Could my knowledge of what someone else can do with a given set of resources include my competition? I can observe them and I can see what they've done and learn from that. Is that part of it, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. You might find that maybe they're making claims that, given their resources, just seem unreasonable to you. That might lead you to discover that they really can't achieve what they're talking about after all. Or if they are doing it, maybe they know something you don't know. Mm-hmm. And maybe you can learn from that. As I say in the book, it's a very good thing to become your competitor's customer, because that way you can experience firsthand how they're serving their customers and the quality of their products, which might inform how you do it too.
Right. That's very, very smart. And then as we progress, you say, once you've established your stars, move to where your stars can shine brightest, which is the economic concept of advantage. And you have this wonderful phrase where you said, different is better than better. Can you tell our listeners about that?
Yes. We entrepreneurs, when we're starting out, we have limited resources. Well-established companies have much more in the way of resources than we do. And so how can we effectively compete? Because we generally won't have more resources than well-established companies will. Well, different is better than better, and different gives us a way that we can compete. I used the example in the book of Apple back in the 1990s. The Windows, Microsoft Windows was the standard operating system that was run on laptops from Dell, from HP, from IBM Lenovo. And each of these laptops was better than the other in some fashion. One, maybe Dell had a bigger screen. Maybe IBM Lenovo had a faster processor. Maybe the HP had longer battery life. Well, in contrast to these competitors, who were each incrementally better than the other in some fashion, Apple was different. Apple did not run Microsoft Windows. Apple developed the operating system and the hardware and tightly integrated them. The initial applications for the Mac, both as a desktop and the laptops, was things like desktop publishing and photos and video later. And these gradually became mainstream applications. And gradually, Apple took market share away from the Windows laptops and later became the most valuable, highly capitalized, or the most valuable company in the world.
Yeah.
So different is better than better. Different, if you can find a dimension to compete along that is not strategic to your competitors, but different from what they're doing, that will give you time and space to get started. And as you may not be the ideal customer for, or you may not be the ideal supplier for all customers, but if there is some subset of customers for whom you are the ideal supplier, then they will buy from you again and again, and you will grow with them as they buy from you again and again, and as they tell their friends or colleagues about you.
Right.
And that's the way I propose in the book to compete with well-established companies. So
Yeah.
different is better than better.
Yeah. I remember one of Apple's early campaigns was think different. So they actually captured that
Yes.
idea as a benefit. And then that also directed them to a segment of the population. They weren't targeting the Windows folks. They were targeting the creatives and the people interested in graphics and
Yes.
those kinds of things. So it was an audience differentiation as well.
Exactly, Hunter.
Okay, so I want to leap ahead a little bit, John, let's assume that our business has started, we found our need, we found our solution, we've got a little bit of different is better, and we've got some business. Now we're looking at growing it. And that's a need that a lot of our small business owners talk about. You have an unusual technique about getting to growth, which I'd not come across before. I'll hint that it involves bowling pins. And I'll
Yes.
also hint that it talks about upscaling needs. So take us through the bowling pin approach, John.
Sure. Well, as an angel investor, I hear a lot of pitches from entrepreneurs, and something that is really unimpressive is to hear an entrepreneur say something like, we're going to get 10% of $1 billion market after 5 years. Well, why is that unimpressive? Because it doesn't tell me anything about how you're going to get to be have $100 million in revenue by getting 10% of the $1 billion market. What is impressive is if you can take that overall $1 billion market and segment it into cells. Think of turning it into a matrix with maybe customer segments on one axis and need segments on the other. And out of all of those cells in that matrix, which cell are you going to address first? Which cell has a customer and a need, which is the very best fit, the lowest hanging fruit for your product or service? So that's the first segment of this. Maybe it's only a 10 or $20 million market rather than $1 billion market. Okay, no problem. Then as you serve that market, you will develop experience, develop brand name awareness, develop satisfied customers, hopefully, who will be able to serve as references. And given the strength that you've gained by addressing that group of customers for that customer need, what's the next group in that matrix that would be easiest to address given those additional strengths?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think of each of those cells as a bowling pin. And you know that when you bowl, the ball hits the first pin, and then the first pin helps you knocks over the next two pins, and those pins knock over the next ones, and so on and so on. So think of each of those cells as a bowling pin, and given the strength and skills and knowledge and so forth that you'll acquire by knocking down each pin, what would be the next easiest pin to knock down, and the next one, and the next one? You can even draw a map through this matrix of bowling pins to show what order you think you're going to best be able to knock them down as you grow. Now, if you can show that level of detail for your growth plan to a potential investor, it's extremely impressive. It not only shows that you have segmented the market to identify the different segments and the ones that are the best fit for you, it also shows that you have thought through what order you want to address those opportunities in. So, and then when you add up the market sizes of all of those different cells, they may well add up to the 100 million that you were talking about earlier. Now, this is something that has to be updated continuously because we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see very far ahead. And even if at this juncture today, we think that the next 5 pins that we knock over will be A, B, C, D, and E, things are going to change. There'll be new competitors, new technologies, all the things I was talking about earlier that will change. And so the path will change and the definition of the cells themselves will change. But still, this will guide a lot of decision making in your business if you have this frequently updated vision of how you're going to grow. So it's useful to you as a manager of your startup and in presenting what you're doing to potential investors both.
Yeah. So it sounds like I keep a physical record of this. It's, as you say, it's a piece of paper, or maybe it's a spreadsheet, or it's a PowerPoint chart. But this is something that physically exists. It's not just a mental exercise, and I do record it. I maybe go back and change it from time to time, or assess whether I knocked the second pin down correctly. Is that right? You see this as a physical aid that I'm using?
Yes, and something that's also very impressive to a potential investor, which is proof of the fact that your business has upside potential, is if you have targeted an initial bowling pin, but you're just starting to get traction in the next adjacent bowling pin or pins.
Mm-hmm.
And these pins may be different industries, they may be different geographies, or they may be different departments in the enterprise, depending upon what type of product it is.
Yeah.
So, for example, your first bowling pin might be San Francisco. Maybe your next bowling pin is Oakland or San Jose, and you're just starting to get initial customers and traction there. Or maybe your first bowling pin is financial services industry, but you're just starting to get your first customers in retail or in high tech. Or it may be that your initial entree into the large enterprise is through customer service, but you're just starting to get your first customers who are using your product or service or solution in sales or marketing. All of these would be ways that you could both demonstrate and achieve upside potential in your business.
Yeah, and you have a case study in the book, John, that I found very illustrative. I wonder if you could just summarize it quickly as an illustration of the bowling pin approach, the 2 Degrees Food case study.
Yes, 2 Degrees Food sells fruit and nut bars. They are here in San Francisco. They initially sold their products and services just online, and then they got a big break, which is Whole Foods, the supermarket chain, took on their fruit and nut bars. Their interesting differentiation from a marketing standpoint is every time they sell one of their fruit and nut bars, they buy a meal for a hungry child somewhere in the developing world. And that might be something very modest, like a bowl of rice or similar. But nonetheless, their marketing angle is that you're doing good by buying a 2 degrees food fruit and nut bar. Anyway, so on the vertical axis, they have charted out how they would like to expand beyond Whole Foods into such areas as gyms and other supermarkets and cafeterias and so forth. And on the horizontal axis, they've charted out how they'd like to see their product line expand from fruit and nut bars to other healthy snacks and to potentially healthy beverages and so forth. Yeah. And they've then done the best they could to plot out how they're going to grow from the cells that they've currently, the bowling pins they've currently knocked down to the next adjacent bowling pins.
Yep, that's a great example. And then another thing I was really pleased about, John, is you said, when I've completed this chart, the bowling pin chart or the Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is with all of the intersections, I have a vision, which I thought was the most practical use of that rather fluffy term that I've seen. You know, when you've made all of those connections, you've done it logically, then you've got a vision rather than just some, kind of big think puffery. So I enjoyed that a lot.
Yes. Well, I define vision as the largest customer need that you can envision your venture satisfying. Mm-hmm. And that makes it really tangible. So if you, in the case of 2 degrees food, maybe their vision is providing healthy snacks, meals, and beverages for consumers throughout North America. Or maybe it's even broader than that, throughout North America and Europe or whatever. And it doesn't focus on products. It doesn't focus on technologies. It focuses on the need that they're addressing. In other words, in this case, hunger for healthy snacks or foods. And the needs tend to change more slowly than products and services. Think about transportation. That's a need. But we've seen all kinds of changes in transportation over the last 50 years. And certainly in the next 20 years with autonomous vehicles, we'll see many more changes. But by focusing on the need, it provides constancy and despite all of the changes that may be happening in products and technologies.
Yeah, that's great advice. And then you say you've established that vision, and you urge entrepreneurs for focus purposes to then work backwards from the vision. So how does that working backwards integrate with a step-by-step approach? Sort that out for us.
Yes. Well, in the book, I give the example of Shireen Yates, who is CEO of a company that recently changed their name. The new name is Nima, N-I-M-A. And she suffers from celiac disease, which means that if she eats food with gluten in it, she'll experience all kinds of discomfort and digestive problems. And she frequently has to eat out at restaurants with clients, and very often restaurants don't even know, the wait staff may not know whether or not the food contains gluten, or they may think it contains gluten, or it doesn't contain gluten when it really does. And so about a third of the time, Shreen discovered that she was experiencing diarrhea or similar problems as a result of having ingested gluten. So she had the idea, what if I created a network of bakeries where you could absolutely trust that the food from those bakeries would not contain gluten? And so she came up with a business plan whereby she would start bakeries first in the Northeast, and then across the United States, and then across the world. Well, this plan had two problems with it. One is it wasn't very scalable, because to start a network of bakeries, even across every state or the major cities in the U.S., much less internationally, where the regulatory environment changes from country to country or into region, it would be very expensive. And two, it really wouldn't address the real customer need, which is, how can I make sure when I go to a restaurant that I'm not eating food that contains gluten?
Mm-hmm.
So she decided instead to work backwards from her goal of making sure that anyone in the world eating out in a restaurant could make sure that food didn't contain gluten. And she teamed up with a mechanical engineer and a chemical engineer, and together they created a device about the size of a package of cigarettes that you can carry in your pocket or purse. And when you're dining out in a restaurant, you can insert a little bit of the food in question into the device, and it will test it for gluten, and then give you a green light or a red light to tell you whether or not it contains gluten. Mm. Well, this, one, satisfies the real customer need, and two, is a highly scalable solution. And because the high-value, high-tech devices can easily be shipped anywhere in the world, they could license manufacturing to different parts of the world if they wanted to. So this is an example of how working back from your goal can help ensure that you actually do reach a meaningful vision for your business. Yeah. And I think the two approaches of working forward with the bowling pins and working backwards from your vision are complementary. And I think of it as broadly akin to, if you're sizing a market, it's both helpful to size it bottom up and top down to make sure that you get roughly comparable results the same way. It's a cross check. If you could consider each consumer in the industry and or in the market and figure out how much they might buy, and then aggregate all those together. Or you might look at the overall market and try to decide what percentage of that overall market you can get. By going both bottom up and top down, you cross-check your results. Well, it's similar here. By starting with your vision and working backwards, and starting from the lowest hanging fruit that you can address first, and then thinking about how you can expand from there to there to there, the two, you can align the two with each other and make sure that the step-by-step bowling pin approach really reaches the vision that you want it to.
Yeah, it's very clear. You mentioned a word there, John, that also can be difficult to interpret sometimes, which is scalability, a scalable business model. And in the book, you talk about that not just as metrics, but what you call the idea of scalability. So can you Can you teach us the secret of scalability? You gave us one example, but is there a general kind of rule?
Well, scalability is increasing revenue or profit in your business for each additional dollar of invested in the business. So if you envision a chart with cash flow or profit or revenue on the vertical axis and capital invested on the horizontal axis, the curve there for your business, the line, might be flat or it might be curving up. If it's flat, that's less scalable. If it's curving up, that's more scalable. And so any business can become more scalable. First of all, it's very desirable to be scalable because, one, it helps you grow your business more rapidly and efficiently with less capital if you are scalable. It gives you more options for responding to competitors who might try to encroach on your business or to other changes in market conditions. And it increases the value of your business to potential acquirers or investors. So no matter how modest your business is, or it's good to be scalable. So what are some of the ways that a company can be made more scalable? Well, I offer two broad categories, sort of the traditional approaches, which are simply improving your operational performance and execution. And that's doing things like streamlining processes and setting incentives so that telesales and other staff are incentivized to be as productive as possible. So there are those kinds of sort of traditional operational metrics, and those are contribute. And then the other broad set of techniques are finding ways to make your business model more scalable. And that could be, those tend to be bigger changes. It may involve introducing automation to eliminate labor. Generally, labor is not very scalable because if a task is human-based, to double the capacity, you may have to double the headcount. Whereas if you can automate a process to double your capacity, you might only have to increase an investment by, say, 10 or 20%. ISPs, internet service providers, that business tends to be highly scalable because it's run off of servers in the cloud. And if I double the number of servers, I might be able to increase the volume of work I can take on by maybe 500%, maybe 1,000%. If I can introduce automation in my manufacturing plant, maybe I can double my production by only investing an additional 10 or 15%. So these are techniques. Making the product more intelligent doesn't add anything to the manufacturing cost generally, maybe a little bit of memory in the product. I use the example of a stuffed bear, a toy bear for kids. If you can make it more intelligent so that the bear can actually have a meaningful conversation with the child, you can charge much more for that. It can appeal to a wider range of kids, maybe an older age range than a bear that doesn't have that capability. And yet the cost of making the bear more intelligent like that is, well, there's a significant fixed cost in programming, but in terms of hardware, it's not that great. It's maybe a faster processor and more memory. And so that software development effort and the AI effort can be spread over more bears. And that makes your business more scalable. If you can leverage network effects, either one-sided or two-sided networks. What do I mean by that? A one-sided network is like FaceTime or Skype, where every user is roughly similar. And that the more such users you have, the more attractive the platform is, because you have more people that you can call via FaceTime or Skype. A two-sided network is one where there are two distinct types of users. So, for example, Match.com tends to have men who are attracted to women and women who are attracted to men, two different groups. Or Monster.com, the job search website, tends to have employers and prospective employees. And the more employers there are, the more employees are attracted. The more employees there are, potential employees, the more employers are attracted.
Yeah,
Same with Match.com.
Skillshare is one of my examples, where the more teachers you get on there, people who want to teach and share their knowledge, the more learners you get on there, people who value that and can learn from it. So it's a great
Yes, a beautiful example.
Yeah.
So in the book, I lay out a step-by-step process whereby any business can start to enjoy some network effects.
Yeah.
So all of these are different ways of making your business more scalable.
There's one more I want to squeeze in, John, because it's very practical, and that's you discuss partnering as a way of growing, and you've got some thoughts about when it's right to partner and when it isn't. I wonder if you could just take us through that a little bit.
Yes. Potentially any task could be handled with a partner. And one of the beauties of living in the age that we do is that it's much easier to find partners than it was in pre-internet days, because we can simply go online and outsource many functions that are not strategic to our business, so that we can focus our precious resources on whatever is the key value added that you're offering. In the book, I offer a 2x2 matrix, which for each of the resources that you either currently have in your business or might need in your business. On one axis is how strong is that resource, or how complete is it? And on the other axis is how essential is it to the customer need that you plan to address. So there are four possibilities. It's a strong resource, but not essential. It's a strong resource, but it is essential. It's a weak or limited resource, which is not essential. And it's a weak or limited resource, which is essential. So you've got four quadrants there, and for each of those, you can think about where you want to be for that resource. So let's say it is a strong resource, but it's not essential to your business. Well, if it, you can be opportunistic about that resource. Maybe you can sell it. Maybe you can license it. If you don't continue to invest in it, it'll probably gradually decline in completeness or competitiveness down to the lower left-hand quadrant, in which case it'll lose value over time. And if, on the other hand, if you can find a new customer need for which it is applicable, then you'll have reason to keep investing in it, and it'll keep its value. One of the points of this matrix is if you don't continuously invest in improving your resources, they will gradually move to the bottom quadrants. The most important ones, of course, are those resources that are in the upper right. They're both important for satisfying whatever customer need that you want to satisfy, and they are strong and or complete. And those you want to preserve and make sure that you don't lose that advantage. In the lower right are ones that are not complete and yet are important for satisfying your need. And those are investment worthy, because if they're important for satisfying your need, you're going to want to make sure that you uh, they're strong and complete.
Mm-hmm.
So those tend to be worthy of investment. You can partner with a company to learn about those techniques, but your goal, presumably over time, will be to uh, uh, take over those tasks or resources yourself over time.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
So those are some of the insights that you can gain by thinking about your resources that way.
Yeah. Good. Well, John, I'm going to manage for time, I'm afraid, and wrap us up. Although there's so much more in your book. I made a little list of things we didn't cover, like the freedom of frugality, which is a great piece of advice, assembling a whole brain team, 5 pricing principles, roadblocks to avoid. And there's just a ton of practical advice in there. So we'll provide a link to the book at mises.org/E4EPod, which is our website for the podcast. Would you permit us to reproduce a couple of these charts just to indicate to our listeners the value of them?
Absolutely, Hunter. Just let me know which ones.
Okay, that's great. And let's wrap up with the subject of ethics. I was just reading a paper about the Austrian entrepreneurial ethic, and it reflects the thought that I've seen you communicate, and it's part of our message in Economics for Entrepreneurs. So tell us how you feel about the ethics of entrepreneurship.
Well, when people usually talk about ethics, they are usually talking about such things as honesty, law-abiding, caring, respectful, and so forth. And I don't disagree with that definition. I like that definition. But along those terms, I don't see entrepreneurs as either more or less ethical than people in any other field. But I do believe entrepreneurs are uniquely ethical in a different sense. And that is that they find new solutions to customer needs, human needs, and thereby they're making the world a better place. Another way to think about it is that they are creating positive sum situations where either zero sum or negative sum situations existed previously. What do I mean by zero sum, positive sum, and negative sum? Well, most of the things that rivet our attention are zero sum or negative sum situations. For example, any contest between two teams is going to be zero sum because only one team will win and another team will lose. If it's a war between two countries, probably, or two parties, or involves violence, it's going to be negative sum because if both sides sustain injury, they both are worse off than before. So these are the interactions among people that we tend to notice the most. But the fact is that the overwhelming number of interactions among people are positive sum. The win-wins, things where we trade, things where we engage in voluntary exchange or interaction. If I give you or sell you something and you pay me in return, that interaction would not happen if it wasn't mutually beneficial. If there's a warm, supporting, loving relationship among members of the family, that's all mutual. That's all positive. So these interactions we tend not to notice. We take them more for granted. But the fact is they're around us all the time. So entrepreneurs create new positive sum situations where they didn't exist previously. And for example, if I come up with a new solution to a human need, and so that people are willing to exchange some of their resources, their cash or whatever, for that solution, they're better off and the entrepreneur is better off. So in that sense, I think of entrepreneurs as being ethical in a unique and important way. People often think of Steve Jobs as being not very ethical because he wasn't very philanthropic in his lifetime. It's true that Jobs was not particularly philanthropic, despite the fact that he was a billionaire as co-founder and CEO of Apple. But look how much good he did in other ways. Before the Mac, computing even personal computing, was really complex. Your older listeners will remember MS-DOS, the Microsoft Disk Operating System, which was an arcane command line control for a personal computer. Macintosh made computers accessible for everybody else who wasn't a computer scientist. He brought computers into schools and used them for education. The iPod let you put 1,000 tunes in your pocket for ready entertainment. The tools like FaceTime brought companionship to the lonely. The Apple itself provides employment for about 100,000 people. And if you consider the entire supply chain from all of the sub-assemblies and assemblies that go into Apple products, all the way through to the millions of mobile apps that run on Apple products, the iPhone and iPad and so forth, employment has been provided to millions of people, and millions of people have become millionaires as a result of Apple. He's done tremendous good in the world just by providing new solutions to human needs.
Yeah.
Well, all of us can do the same on whatever scale we're able to contribute. We can just by finding new solutions to human needs, we're making the world a better place. We don't need permission. We don't need credentials. We just need to go out doing it. And so for all of your listeners, go out there and have fun doing it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John. You're a wonderful, wise philosopher. You think like an Austrian, whether you know it or not, because that's exactly our philosophy. And I think we'll find a way to invite you back to drill down into some of the other contents of your book. But let's wrap it up there and just thank you very much. We appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Hunter, thanks so much for having me.
Economics for Entrepreneurs is a production of the Mises Institute. To explore more content like this, visit Mises.org. That's MISES.org. For more from Hunter Hastings, check out hunterhastings.com.